Howdy, Lark and Rose here. Time for the next keyboard lesson. Again, this keyboard lesson is brought to you by Tom Smith, who donated so I would do more. So this is the second one that he gets credit for having happen. So last time I introduced you to the idea of find a chord pattern and play around with trying to write a tune, a melody that goes along with it. Whether you're doing that by just plinking around on a keyboard or actually hear it in your head and hum it and then figure out how to play it on the keyboard. Now I'm going to get into a little bit of how notes fit together, because there are a whole bunch of things which by themselves sound cool, and if you combine them, they sound utterly horrendous, even if they fit the same chord pattern. So I'm going to use the chord pattern I was doing last time, D minor, F, G, B flat, which I used for a song that I wrote like when I was 12 or something. And I'm just going to make this up as I go along, but I'm going to demonstrate two little melody things that both, like, they each sound good and together they sound horrible. They each sounded like a melody, not that great, but a melody. But some of them were notes right next to each other, so together it would have been which is not pleasant. So now we have to get into intervals, which is how far apart the notes need to be so that if they play at the same time, they don't sound horrible. As a general rule, again, every time I say a rule, there are a million exceptions to it. You don't want notes to be right next to each other when you're playing them. For example, in a C major, which is that, you can very easily use the second in a melody. Third, second, root, second, third, 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 Mary had little lamb. But if you play them all together, kind of sounds obnoxious. Those three together sound sort of eh. And same with the fourth. And if you play all five together, it's just sort of this ugly mess. But if you play the root and the fifth with the third, it sounds cool. Without the third, but with the second, sounds pretty cool. Without the third or the second, but with the fourth, sounds pretty cool. That's just moving the middle note. But you want to make sure you don't have so many notes that they crowd together and cause unpleasant dissonance. Dissonance is when there's frequencies close enough to each other that they sort of sound weird to your brain. Now, there's a bunch of kinds of dissonance that are really cool that I use all the time, that like lots of musicians do. We're going to get into that. So again, it's sort of a balancing act of you want it to be close enough to normal and predictable that your ear likes it, but weird enough that it's also interesting and your ear doesn't immediately get bored. Because imagine if I just played the notes on the on beats and in the chord and nothing else. It's like quickly boring, but so you want both, again, like I talked about last time, you want both the timing to be weird and broken up enough to sound cool and where the notes are going. But now we're going to get into intervals. Now, I'm going to do this in C major because then it's all on the white notes, and it visually makes it easier to keep track of what I'm doing. It's true in any key. Doesn't matter how weird it is, but it's harder to like do the counting and figuring it out. So this, like I said, is the third. In a C major, there's the root note, it's a C, and this is the major third, and there's the fifth. So this is a third interval. This distance apart between notes often fits together. You can play them both at the same time, and they're not conflicting horribly with each other because they're a third apart. In fact, if you're familiar with Pachelbel's canon, almost the entire thing is thirds playing around the whole time. It's in D major. Slow motion on that last part. It's that interval the whole time. It's hard to play it that way with chopsticks. But a third interval usually sounds, comfortable. Now, there's still wrong notes you can do. But that interval apart, those notes won't fight with each other. You can also do fourths, which is one step more. Okay, so here's the C. There's the fourth. Again, this is visually easier because I'm doing it in C major, but I'm just doing that. And then there's fifth intervals, which is like the chord but without the middle note. So it's not major or minor, or it could be either one. So fifths. And you'll notice that fourths and fifths sound very Chinese, to be racist about it, because in that culture they focused a lot on leaving out the third, major and minor, because they just didn't use them for whatever reason, not very much. So a lot of it is... Now, there's not some rule that you have to keep the same interval. I'm just demonstrating what thirds look like and what fourths look like and what fifths look like. You can totally and should switch it up all over the place. So you're going from fifths to sixths to a fifth to a third to another third to a fourth to a fifth. So the point isn't that you have to keep that interval and jump around with it. I just did that to demonstrate kind of what they sound like. But when you have different parts going along with each other, you don't want them tripping over each other. You want them far enough apart that they sound cool together, that they make a harmony instead of just a mess. Now, when I talk about harmonies, people often think of singing, but it doesn't have to mean that. There can be two voices singing and one singing like this and one singing like this, and together they go, and it sounds cool. But you can also have a flute doing that and strings doing this and a piano doing a thing over here. So when I'm talking about harmonies, I don't just mean singing. I mean ways to put instruments together, whether it's a voice or a guitar or a piano, or you're just playing the chord on the piano, and it's all on one instrument. But the intervals to use that are probably going to sound better and not heinous when you're writing stuff. And if you crowd a bunch of notes together, it's going to sound ugly. But if you spread them out, it can sound like it was actually intentional. Now, I'm going to get into a little bit because these things are all intertwined. Remember, at the end of the day, the thing that matters is, does it sound cool? Do you like the way it sounds? Because if you do, that's the only purpose of having any of the rules, is to make something that you think sounds cool. If you made something that sounds cool that breaks all of the rules, cool, screw the rules. But when we get into chords and melodies wandering around, it adds parts to the chord. Like here's a C major. There's the major third. This is a C major seventh. It's the same chord, but with a thing added to it. And it gives it a different feel, and it sounds more sophisticated and stuff. And the melody may do that. So you may have a C chord, but the melody is going... And that's basically making it into a C major seventh. Because when you're hearing a song played, all the notes together of all the instruments make up the chord. So if you're hearing an orchestra, it may be playing a zillion different notes in a zillion different places, but they add up to one big chord. And so the melody can sort of make a chord be more sophisticated by adding things to it. Like this is the second. If this is a C major chord, here's the second. It's also sometimes called a ninth when you put it up there. It's a little bit weird, but that's just what happens. Because the eighth is the octave as in octopus, 8. The one above that is the ninth, but it's also the same note as the second. It's just an octave higher. But you can play a C with the major, 7th, and a 9th in it. It's a little bit weird sounding, but it's kind of cool. But when your melody is wandering around doing things like that, it has to complement the chord, but it doesn't have to be the notes in the chord. So you can have a melody, so the chord may just be at C major, and a melody going. And it's, pardon the weird decay on the voice I have on this right now. But when you're writing a part, like if you did the exercise before where you went through the chords and you made up a part to it, now try to, if you can record both of those together, try to write another part that goes with that. And it's going to have to be a certain distance away so you're not tripping over the same notes and making a jumbled mess. And as you add more parts, you'll find that it quickly can become very crowded, and you can get to the point where, well, now I can't hear the original part. I can't hear the melody anymore because there's too much noise around it, crowding it. And, that's one of the things I've done wrong for years and years, is I tend to write too many parts and make it too crowded and too complicated. Then I have to take a few out to make it just barely tolerable. But write a part and then play around with other parts to see what goes together, and to get used to not just hearing the original note, but hear different notes going together. Because when you play a chord, what that really is this note and this note and that note and that note and that note and that note. And they could be played all on different instruments, but together they make the chord. But whatever melody you're putting with that, or whatever other parts, they have to fit together, but they have to also do weird enough stuff to be interesting. Again, it's the balance between do it normal enough that your brain likes it, that it isn't just disorganized chaos where it can't find any patterns in anything pleasant, and also do it weird enough that it finds it interesting. And so, for example, Elton John and Bernie Taupin, the guy who wrote with him, and I think still does, billion years later, written 80 bazillion songs that everybody in the world recognizes. And his melodies are not that complicated. They're not really intricately weird. They're just very memorable because he channels very well, which is what I refer to it as, just sort of hearing a song that's supposed to exist and then figuring it out. And he'll use a bunch of seconds and fourths and sixths and weird suspensions and stuff in the melody that make it different enough to make it memorable. There's a bunch of people who they write very simple melodies and nobody's going to remember them because they weren't weird enough. And then there's people who write stuff that's too damn weird, you can't even wrap your brain around it, and so you don't remember those either. So to write, and the ultimate measure of success is whether you like it, not whether other people remember it. But the point is, I would suggest trying to go for the balance where you're doing stuff that's weird enough that it kind of stands out and sounds cool, while not being so damn weird that it stops sounding fun to listen to. So I would suggest doing the chord pattern, go through the chord pattern, come up with a melody, and if you can record that too, see if you can come up with another part that goes along with it. Now, there's a trick to this, because if you're playing around with the other part, you may find another part that you were paying attention to that sounds cool with the chord, but you don't notice that it actually conflicts with the first thing you found in some place and sort of trips over itself and sounds ugly somewhere because the melodies are sort of stepping right next to each other. So there's an art to finding other parts that go together. And whether it's, all the way up to a friggin' Mozart symphony where you have 50 bazillion things going on at once, but they all fit, or somebody strumming a guitar and singing a song. So, but I want to, let's see, what was the other thing I was going to quick cover in this lesson? Because this was mostly supposed to be about keyboards, try a thing where you get a chord pattern. It doesn't have to be this one. I'm just using this one as an example. You can find your own. See if you can find a melody that goes all the way through like 4 cycles but doesn't repeat itself. Because often you'll have some melody that it does a thing with the chord pattern and then it does the same thing over again with the chord pattern and then it does the same thing over again with the chord pattern. See if you can find a melody that goes through 4 sets of that. So 4 sets of 4. So if you're doing this chord pattern, that's 1, then you do it again. But instead of writing a melody that repeats 4 times, see if you can write one melody. I'll do the thing in a minute where I play through so you can actually record that and use that as the reference. Write one melody that has 4 different parts that go through the whole thing so that it's wandering around and doing different stuff, even though the chord pattern is the same all 4 times. So I'm going to quick throw this in again. Again, this is just D minor, F, G, B flat. So that was 4 patterns. So see if you can find a melody, even if you have to keep rewinding and going over it or loop it, that does a different thing throughout that whole thing. Now, most songs have different chord patterns. They'll do a pattern that repeats a few times and then they'll do something else. You may or may not be familiar with the concept of a verse and a chorus. You've probably heard that a million times of the, popular songs of, it sings the verse and then it gets to the chorus with the hook that everybody remembers. And then it does another verse, and sometimes it'll do what's called a bridge, which is just, we'll throw in another weird part that isn't the verse or the chorus just to break things up and make it interesting. But the verse will have one chord pattern and the chorus will have a different chord pattern and the bridge will have a different chord pattern, and they fit together, and going back and forth between them does that. There are some songs which literally do the same chord pattern through the whole freaking song. In fact, there are a lot of rock songs that are basically 3 stinking chords. There are some that are 1, like... literally the whole stinking song. Born in the USA by Bruce Springsteen, who does a lot of intricate, cool stuff. And that song's C and F and nothing else the whole time. And the same pattern in the right hand, even on the piano. There are other instruments doing stuff. But there are a lot of songs that are just 3 chords repeating. But to me, that gets sort of boring. But again, it's what you think sounds cool. So if you like 3 chords over and over again, do that. You don't have to tailor it to my tastes. But after you do the 4 chord pattern, make up your own, or you can use mine if you feel like it, but make up your own, play around until you find 4 chords that sound cool, repeat it over and over again. Write a melody that goes all the way through 4 cycles of that, but the melody doesn't repeat. It does. And I'll just ad-lib one right now. I'm just making it up as I go along with that chord pattern to demonstrate that. And you can watch, my left hand will go, not that fast, but it will go through, you can watch it to see what the chord is, but my right hand will just do a wandering melody that I'm just going to make up right now. So, and by the way, it can be a melody for singing. It can be a guitar solo. It can be a thing you play on a keyboard. It can be whatever. When I say melody, it doesn't have to mean singing. But see if you can make one part that wanders around through 4 sets of that thing. And then the next part of your homework is see if you can find a different set of chords that it then goes into, that then jumps to something else. And that can be a challenge. And it's sometimes the transitions are very sort of gentle and they fit, and sometimes they're drastic, and that can be totally cool, where it feels like you just totally jump to a different feel, like a whole key change. I haven't even gotten into how keys work yet. I mean, the playing in the key of C or the key of F minor or whatever. But see if you can find one chord pattern and then a cool melody to go along with it 4 times through, but the melody doesn't repeat, and then jump to different chords and write a different melody to go with that, whether it's a guitar part or a vocal or whatever, as a practice for making stuff up. Now, along the way, you may very well find that, like, you write a thing and after a while you kind of don't like it. And you have to either spruce it up or throw it away and start over or whatever. But that's just what happens. But if you find something you like, I'm going to emphasize this again for all the times I've screwed it up. If you find something you like, quickly record it. Because it can even be like, oh, I found a cool little riff and I thought that's really cool. And then I played a few other things and I was like, wait, what was that riff again? I already forget. So as soon as you find it, make a dumb little recording of it, even if just with your phone, then play around, and then you can go back and find it again if you need to. So that's your homework now. But I'm going to add one piece to the homework. If you have the capability, at some point I'm going to have to get into like explaining Reaper or Pro Tools. Pro Tools is the expensive as hell version. Reaper just cheap. Where you actually have a program where you can record a whole bunch of instruments one at a time, and they can all play at the same time, or your own voice, or guitar, or keyboard, or whatever. We're not going to get into that. But the one little thing I'd add on to your homework is a 4-chord pattern with a melody that goes through 4 patterns of it, then a different chord pattern. Doesn't have to be 4, it can be 2, 3, 4, 8, whatever, and a different melody to go with it. After you do that and record it, you don't have to play it to anybody else. Do that and record it. Play it through with the chords going and your melody going, and see if you can hear another thing on top of that. And to make it easier, make it literally on top, like higher notes, whether it's going to be a guitar or a voice or whatever, and see if you can make a part that goes along with the chords and the melody, including the melody that didn't repeat. So the melody wanders around, you have to find another part that wanders around matching it. Now, it doesn't have to be at the same time. It can pause. It can go back and forth. It can do what's called calling and answering, where one instrument does something and another instrument does something else, or it can be a voice, blah, 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 blah. Or they can be at the same time or whatever. But your homework now is see if you can do a thing that has 2 sets of chord patterns. One it does 4 times with a melody that goes with it. Then it switches to another chord pattern, has a different melody that goes with it. And then when you get that, record that and play that over and over again and see if you can hear in your head something that goes along with all of that and fits. So that's sort of your homework for now. And I guess that might be enough babbling for now. Keep in mind, more and more of this, the more you know the rules, the more it's going to be you playing around on your own instead of, learning something from a lesson. So it becomes more and more homework where you get, okay, here's a thing to go play around with, till eventually, like, isn't lessons at all. It's you playing around on a keyboard or whatever and finding cool stuff on your own. So that is going to be it for this second lesson. And there isn't, like, I'm going to emphasize this again. At the end of the day, it's, do you make something that you think sounds cool? And nothing else really matters. So all the rules are just a way to hopefully get to that faster than you would just by trial and error, is giving you some guess of where you should probably be if you're trying to find things that fit. So anyway, I guess that's enough for this lesson. So yeehaw, go make some music.